And we begin tonight with Warren Hinckle, who is a icon in San Francisco. I'm just going to mention one thing that I did not know, that you've received the Thomas Paine and the H.L. Mencken Awards, and I'm sure you've won other awards as well. You know, it's funny that we have lots of friends here in San Francisco. We know each other, but when it comes to the achievements, people keep quiet. You've never brought it up. You're just an accomplished journalist. You're probably one of the most accomplished
journalists. $3 get you a drink.
Yeah, no, you're going to listen to this. What you did at Ramparts during the 60s, where you were editor, and you tell me, I didn't know you teamed with Hunter S. Thompson, who just passed away.
Yeah, we just finished up a book on him.
Yeah, tell me about how does Gonzo journalism develop among you guys?
Well, Hunter we sent him to this when we were doing Scanlins, which is a magazine out of San Francisco in an old firehouse on Pacific Street. And Hunter, he always called you in the middle of the night. That was
Hunter Thompson.
Yeah, it's always 3, 4 in the morning. You knew it was Hunter. And he says, "God damn it!" He always said, "God damn it, gotta go to the Kentucky Derby." Well, it was like Wednesday or Thursday. Kentucky Derby was Saturday. It's like, well, okay, you want to go to the Kentucky Derby? We'll go. Yeah. He says, well, photographer. I said, all right, we'll find somebody. So it was short notice. So I thought of this guy, Ralph Steadman, who was a British cartoonist whose work I'd seen many times, very evil-minded, twisty kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And somehow we found the guy. He happened to be in the United States lecturing or something. So we dragged him to Kentucky. He'd never met Thompson before. And they ended up going through this haze of alcohol and drugs and madness of, you know, the whole Kentucky Derby day and night and the next day. Thompson ended up driving the guy back to the airport in his convertible and macing him and throwing him out on the sidewalk and saying, "We don't need your kind in Kentucky." And he wrote the whole thing just the way it happened.
Ah.
And that was Gonzo journalism, which was the participants being part of the story.
Again.
Well, the writer and the illustrator in this case, he wrote about Steadman all the time and what he was doing wrong and how he was insulting people, and Steadman would draw, but Hunter was doing the same time. And then he threw him out of the car and maced him, and Steadman had to draw that. And so they became part of the story themselves.
At that time when you were doing Ramparts, there was a war. And the war then in Vietnam did create certain cultural and artistic movements. All the work you did at Ramparts.
Yeah, most of it out of San Francisco.
Most of it out of San Francisco. People don't realize it. Have we lost that in San Francisco? I mean, do we have in your opinion, have we lost the thriving art of journalism? I don't mean newspapers. I mean the art of journalism and publication of significant magazines that have impact and are of noteworthy quality.
Well, the magazines in the city now are more lifestyle and upper lifestyle type magazines. It's hard to tell the difference between, you know, their decors and their fashion layouts than, you know, it's like airports. Got to be after a few years, every airport, you didn't know what city you were in.
Exactly, yeah.
The concessions looked the same, the signs were the same.
Sure.
But there aren't, certainly in Ramparts and Scanlins and other magazines came out of this town. Mother Jones is still going. That's, you know, lefty-orientated magazine. Mm-hmm. But we're connected with the magazines that are coming out of here now, I'd say, aren't really connected with broad social movements or San Francisco radicalism or San Francisco art, the way they were in those particular magazines.
Okay, look, we know, anyone who knows you were going to be on the program knows we're going to talk about politics. And your view of what's going on in this great city, when you've been an observer and you've chronicled the various eras, where are we as a city right now in terms of its politics, its demographics, its future, its changes? You're watching it. What are you seeing?
In a way, it seems like we're back to 1976.
Okay, tell me about
1976 was the election when George Moscone was elected mayor. Shortly thereafter, a couple of years, assassinated, as we all know. And he ran against an extreme conservative guy named John Barbagelata, who was a real estate man from West Portal, represented the values of the so-called west side of town. And that was the last great election where the town was divided between sort of west side conservative values, if you want, versus once you crossed Market Street into the Mission and into the artistic areas and the poorer areas. And that election, Moscone won that barely by 4,000 votes, and there was a serious question if the election had been stolen. You know, ballot books were never turned in, amounting to about 10,000 lost votes, and it was quite a thing.
Democratic tradition.
Yeah. But the town was, you know, divided then, haves and have-nots, or one side versus the other. And it's changed a lot since that time in the middle 70s. But it seems like we're drifting more and more back to that, haves versus have-nots, issues like that. It's almost come full cycle in 25, 30 years. I think this business is going on now with Supervisor Ed Jew, or suspended Supervisor Ed Jew, is reminiscent of some of the madness that was going on then.
Why do you say that? I mean,
well, they apparently want to have a trial of Ed Jew.
But why is it similar to that period? What was going?
Because in 1976, I think it was the same year the election. The election might have been fall '75, when Moscone was elected. There was a trial, the end all trials at City Hall, and it was a great guy named Joe Mazzola. He was the head of the Plumbers Union.
Okay.
A feisty, wonderful guy, American story, an orphan. Italian orphan, came out, rode the rails at 14, got into town in the rail yards with no money, and ended up building the most successful plumbers union in the United States, which is still going strong today, and his son is running it right here in town. And he was a pioneer and a tough guy, solid guy. And there was a city workers' strike. The craft workers, you know, the plumbers and electricians struck the city. And it got pretty ugly. And a lot of the supervisors were then elected citywide, not by district, were very anti-union, let's say. Were many more formal party-identified Republicans on the board.
We're talking 1976.
Yeah, in the middle 70s. So it came to the point where Mazzola was charged, because he was on the airport commission as head of the Plumbers Union, a grand tradition of union officials being on commissions.
Sure.
And there was, you know, sabotage during the strike. You know, sprinklers were broken in Golden Gate Park. Things were flooded. The Johns were overflowing down at the airport.
All having to do with plumbing.
A lot to do with plumbing, sure. And, you know, Dianne Feinstein then was the supervisor before she became mayor after George's assassination, when he and Harvey Milk were killed. And she was after this guy Mazzola big time. She says, "It's your fault. How can you be a commissioner, sit on the city job when your people are doing?" He said, "Hey, we don't know my people. I don't know who's doing it, right? Anybody could be doing it, yeah?" Says, "You have to order them to your people back to fix all these things that happen." He says, "We're on strike. I'm not going to do that, right? We're on strike, lady." So they charged Mazzola and said, "You're going to be thrown off the airport commission because you won't end your strike to make these repairs, and you have a job as a city commissioner." Well, it was like a 5-night trial. The full board of supervisors sat. It was televised on KQED. A fabulous trial. And at the end, he was removed from the airport commission, and the only guy who voted for him was the extreme conservative who lost to George Moscone for mayor, John Barbagelata, who was a very fair-minded guy and just said, "This guy is getting railroaded and screwed here."
That's fascinating. And you're right. There is that is the scenario that's building around Ed Jew.
It's so similar, even to the point of, there's a question now, can some of these supervisors vote when it ultimately comes to their jurisdictions, as apparently it's supposed to be? Can they vote to throw this guy off their own board when they've already said publicly that, you know, he's a flight risk, he should leave, you know, it's too much. I mean, very clearly several members have said he should be gone. So how can they vote? And Feinstein at then was in the same situation, because she had so condemned this guy publicly, the head of the Plumbers Union, and Mazzola later sued her for libel, right? And by the way, end this story of this trial, they kicked them off. 5 years later, the case was overturned on appeal. And the California Supreme Court ruling was that union executives have a right to be appointed like anybody else to a city commission or post. And the fact that their members vote to go on strike doesn't change their status as a commissioner voting on like matters of issues. You know, they can't tell them to end the strike just because they're a commissioner. It was kind of a landmark decision. And it's still a law today.
The difference, though, between 1976 and now is, like you said, there were two parties. There were two factions. There was a healthy debate between Republicans and Democrats, unionists in the corporate world, whatever the opposition.
The town ran a lot better when there were more Republicans on the board. I'll tell you that. It's true.
Thank you. And but the thing is now, with poll numbers as supposedly they are, we have a homogenous electorate. Everyone's satisfied. There's no great party division. The Democratic Party is not fighting with itself. The Green Party is pretty much quiet now. The Republicans are quiet. It doesn't seem to be that there is this great division politically and intellectually that we've had in the past, and the kind of great debates on issues that we've had in the past.
Well, that's sort of one of the consequences, I guess, of one-party government. And you know, district elections have brought a sort of a unified vision, if you want, to the Board of Supervisors, which is more to the left, if you want to put it that way, than has been in boards that were elected citywide in the past. Yet boards that were elected citywide in the past ended up being much more progressive boards in terms of getting things done, in terms of hearing people's complaints and dealing with issues. Now you seem to have an agenda-driven Board of Supervisors and the natural resistance of the mayor's office to, hey, you guys are gradually taking over every bit of power, and we can't let you do that. And siding is divide again. You've got the entire east part of town, again, the poorer part. There's no such thing as poor San Francisco anymore. It used to be. But it is the poorer part of town compared to Pacific Heights and, you know, the Sunset and west of Twin Peaks area, the Richmond. And I've never seen such class division in the city, anger of people just feeling left out. And that's really an anomaly because district elections were supposed to bring closer representation. By the way, Arthur, they were also supposed to bring cheaper representation, right? There were going to be less aides because the supervisors were closer to the district representative. Now you've got more aides than ever before. Elections were supposed to cost less because, hey, it was just districts.
Right.
Look at the figures for the last two elections. More has been spent on district elections cumulatively than used to be spent on citywide elections when people had to raise a hell of a lot of money. You know? And these little district supervisors have raised their own salary to the point far beyond anybody would have dreamed of when people were supervisors were part-time supervisors. So the machinery of government has become so much bigger, and the bigger the machinery gets, the less it seems to be in touch with the complaints of people, whether it's potholes in a neighborhood, the traditional cliche, or zoning fights out in the mission.
I want to continue this discussion. We're going to take a break right now. And you stay with us. We'll be back right after this. And we return now with Warren Hinckle.